morning we've got a little object lesson that we're going to be taking a look at. We're starting a new series here this morning, and so I've got my little camp stove here. And who here likes to go camping? Any campers in the room? There you go. Any people who like to go hiking or maybe fishing or any kind of outdoorsy sorts of things? Excellent. All right. So we've got some of our outdoorsy type of folks here this morning, and we are my wife and I. We are kind of. We're kind of outdoorsy light, you know. We're Hudson Valley hikers, you know. So like we do our Mount Beacons and our Storm Kings and those kinds of things, and so we enjoy all of that. But we have friends. We spent a week up in New Hampshire. The week before we went up to New Hampshire for our retreat. So we went up for our retreat, but the week before we went up just for ourselves to do a little camping in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Anybody ever been there? Everybody? Yeah, there you go. We got a few. That's awesome. And so we have friends up in New Hampshire who are like, you know, serious outdoors people, and so they've like hiked all the 40,000 footers in the White Mountains and all that, and they have like stories about like getting stuck on, you know, Mount Washington in a snowstorm and all that. You know, New Hampshire, crazy New Hampshire people, we love them. And you know, so we thought, you know, this time around that we would hike one of the 40,000, or one of the, not 40,000, one of the 4,000 footers because, you know, we got to say that we did one, right? Can you throw, we've got a couple of just pictures here, just a couple of summer pictures. We're hanging on to summer, so there's the beautiful White Mountains down by the lake there. Go to the next one. And, hey, there's a moose. We got to see some moose. We actually saw 6 moose while we were up there, or meese, or whatever we might be the proper nomenclature. And so, beautiful time up there in the White Mountains. And then can we go to the next one? And so we decided we were going to hike Mount Osceola. Mount Osceola. We kind of picked the 4,000 footer that we thought might be the easiest for us, and so we hiked it. And go to the next one. And there we are hiking Mount Osceola. And so it took us about like 7 hours or maybe a little bit more to get all the way up, stay at the top. And then there's the top. It's super beautiful. So we felt like it was worth it once we actually got there. Go to the next one. And is there one more? Yeah, there you go. And we can just leave that one up there. So the top of Mount Osceola. So it was a workout for us, but we stretched ourselves a little. But we had a lot of fun up there on the mountain. And you know, but as you're hiking, as you're climbing something like this, you start to ask certain questions, right? Like you get about halfway up, and then your mind starts to go, and you start asking things like, "Why am I doing this?" Right? Like you start to ask these questions. Like, I don't know what is it? You know, why am I doing this? Because it's fun, right? Like it's fun to go hiking and climb a mountain, but at the same time too, it's also pretty strenuous, you know. And it's like, man, like this is hard. And really, we really want to kind of ask that question here a little bit this morning, because I do think that there is something about a mountain that calls to us, you know? Like there's something about a mountain that's like, there's a mountain, so like I feel like I just got to go climb it. I got to go do that thing. And I think it's because that there's something deep inside of us as people that I think that we are actually made to be mountain climbers, that we are made to be people that overcome challenges. And when we climb a mountain, it's interesting that Nancy had that word about the climbing the mountain here this morning. And so when we climb a mountain, we are, I think, in some way play acting what we do in all of life. Because life is like a landscape, right? It's got the highs and it's got the lows, it's got the valleys and it's got the peaks and it's got the treacherous places where you got to be a little bit careful, and it's got the quiet pastures, right? We've got all those sorts of things. And so when we're climbing a mountain, it's kind of like we're doing what we do in life, which is to overcome the challenges, you know, because we need those challenges, I believe. We need the things that are a little bit difficult, and we need to be able to stretch ourselves in that way, because that's how we grow, right? Like that's how we get stronger. That's how we enable us to take that next step. And so in Deuteronomy chapter 11, he talks about this, and so he says that God is saying to the Israelites, I'm taking you into a new land, and it's not going to be like the old land. The old land was Egypt. The old land, you got fed every day, right? Like there was a little guy who came to you and you know, brought the food for all the people, and you grew things and irrigated, and you can throw that up if we have it there. But, you know, it all kind of came to you because you were slaves, right? Like you were slaves, and so it was easy in that way, but you were slaves, right? Which is not such a great thing. And he says, the land that I am leading you into, you're going to be free. You're going to experience freedom. But it's not going to all be brought to you kind of on that plate. Instead, he says, the land that you are crossing into is a land of mountains and valleys that drinks the rain from heaven. He says, that you're going to need to rely on God as you are pressing on into this new country. You can't just rely on the jailer, right? And sometimes we want security. Sometimes we want to be safe and secure. Well, there is such a thing as a maximum security place, isn't there? And there's one down the road over by where my parents live. It's called Greenhaven. It's a prison, right? A maximum security prison. And I'm sure there are some positive things about that are nice, but you sacrifice them, right, when you do that. And God wants us to live free, that we're made to be those that would climb mountains. And the thing that's cool about a mountain is that a mountain is not like usually a vertical straight up and down, right? Because that, for most of us, would be impossible. Like, we just wouldn't be able to climb that. But instead it's not like this, it's like this, right? Understand? So it's like an ascent. And so that's what enables us to climb it, so that each step is a little higher and a little higher and a little higher. And so in some sense, each step points to the next step. It enables you to take the next step. It gives you what you will take to be able to make that next step. And so God says this, kind of paraphrasing here, but God then says, he says, basically, if you guys are faithful to me, if you follow me, if you take that next step and that next step and that next step, I will give you what you need for the next one. I will enable you to begin to climb to that next place. And he says, and then I will send you rain, and you will gather your grain and olive oil. I will provide grass for your cattle, and you will eat, and you will be satisfied. And yet sometimes when we're climbing, like when we're kind of halfway up that mountain, we can need a little bit of encouragement, can't we? Right? We can get a little bit stuck. It's possible to get discouraged. It's possible to get off the trail a little bit, to kind of lose your way, or to stumble, or to trip, or whatever it might be. We can get injured or something like this. And so how do we? So God warns them. He says, "Be careful, or you will be enticed to turn away." He says there will be things where it's like, that looks like a trail, but that's not going where you want to go. You're going to be enticed to get off the trail. But he says, no. You've got to stay on the trail. You've got to continue on, because if you go that way, he says, the ground will yield no produce. You will soon perish from the good land that God is giving you. And so we need God's guidance to be able to stay on the trail and keep going as we are climbing. Are you guys with me on this illustration? We understand? Okay. And so 3 things that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about mountain climbing here this morning and how that relates to various aspects of our lives, and 3 things that we can overcome. This is in your app as well, so if you want to follow along on the Vineyard Hopewell app, you can. And there'll be some of this on the screen as well. But 3 things that we can overcome as we are seeking to climb mountains, and those are discouragement, distraction, and what I'm going to call displacement. We'll talk about what that is in a little bit. And so 3 things that we can overcome. We're going to spend a few weeks talking about this, and I just want to mention that Ray kind of teased at a series that we're going to be doing a few weeks further down the line as we get closer to the election, talking about the political landscape and how do we navigate that as we're hearing about headlines with things blowing up and assassination attempts and debates and all that craziness that's going on out there. It's like you could think of that almost as like one of these mountains, right? It's like one of these challenges, and how do we navigate that? But I want to take a few weeks to talk first of all about how do we climb mountains in general, okay? So how do we navigate this kind of landscape of life in which we find ourselves? And so we're going to do that. So I have here my little camp stove, and anybody have one of these at home? You got a little camp grill there with a little thingy, and so we're going to see what happens with this. But so let's see if I can get this rolling here and see what happens here. We're going to get a little flame here. Let's see. Yep. Nope. Let's try it again. There we go. I think we got it. Okay. There we go. I'm making Matt super nervous. It's okay, Matt. We're going to be fine. It's cool. All right. We'll just keep an eye on that. So if anything starts burning behind me, just let me know. No, it's going to be good. But anyway, and so one of the places that we can find ourselves as we're going along is not on the peak. We don't necessarily start at the top, right? Many times we start in a low place, right? We start in a valley, and we can find ourselves in the low places of life. Have you ever found yourself in a low place in life? Yes? Okay, right. So there you go. And so and sometimes we're in a low place because that's just kind of the place that we've started. It's just sort of the place that we find ourselves because we haven't yet climbed. We're kind of just there, and we're waiting, and we're looking to start climbing. Or sometimes we find ourselves in that low place because something has brought us down, right? Maybe we were going along, and then just something kind of brought us into that low place. But I think really that when we think about kind of navigating the landscape of life, that it's necessary to descend before you can ascend. Do you think that's true? Right? So say you're on a hill over here, and then, and it's okay, it's fine, but then there's this mountain over here, and that's where you really want to get to. Well, what's in between? A valley, right? There's a low place there. And so you have to do what? You can't just jump from here to here. You have to you have to go down. You've got to descend before you can climb, and then you can get to that other side. And so sometimes it's necessary that we descend, but sometimes, here's the thing that can get us hung up on this a little bit, and that is what I'm going to call discouragement, because let's imagine this. Let's say you've got a job, right? You're at a job, and it's okay, it's fine. You're just doing your thing. And then, but you see the thing in the distance of like where you'd really like to be, like the thing that you're actually passionate about, and you'd like to actually get there. Well, in between there is the like leaving of the job, right? There's the leaving security behind, leaving the thing that's comfortable, leaving the thing that you're familiar with, and exiting that and going on this adventure to be able to climb this mountain. And sometimes we can. And that requires courage, doesn't it, right? It requires bravery to go down into the valley. And discouragement is what? Not courage. Not having the courage, having a lack of that courage, or having that courage being kind of snatched away from us. And so if we're discouraged, we don't have the courage. So what do we need? We need to be encouraged, right? We need to be given the courage. And so we need encouragement to be able to say, yeah, you know what? I am going to descend into the valley because I know that there's a mountain on the other side. Well, what is it that gives us that kind of courage? What can give us that courage? And I know that for me, one of the things, it can be many things, but one of the things that encourages me is the Word of God. I think this is a lot of the reason why we turn to the Word of God. And the Psalms are super encouraging for me. In Psalm 23, you guys probably know it, maybe even know it by heart. The Lord is my shepherd, right? I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the quiet waters. But if you go a little further down, remember this. He says, even though I walk through what? The darkest valley, right? Or the valley of the shadow. He says, I will fear no evil, for why? For you are with me. The idea is this, that we can have the courage to descend, even to go down into the valleys, go down into these sometimes dark places. Why? Because He is with us. Because we're not alone. And having that can give us the courage. If you're alone, right, it's just you, and it can be really super scary. But if you know that God is with you, even in the valley, it can give you the courage, even to go down into that place so that we can ascend the other side. Does that make sense? You with me? Okay. Now, the other way that we can find ourselves discouraged is this. Maybe you say, well, maybe I'm actually in that valley, right? Maybe I'm down there, and maybe I've experienced some kind of loss in my life, some kind of grief, maybe some kind of suffering, maybe some kind of pain or discouragement or failure or mistake or whatever, or something that was done to you, and we can find ourselves brought down into that dark place. And what tends to happen there is it's possible for us to get stuck in that place, right? Like, it's necessary to go down, but we're not actually meant to live there forever, right? Like, it's important that when we experience grief or loss or any of those kinds of things, like, we actually do need to take the time to grieve, right? You agree with me? Like, you have to take the time to process through, and, like, don't rush yourself. Take the time to actually feel the feelings. Take the time to actually go through the pain and process through that, because that's how healing can come about, is when we take the time to do that. But on the other side, there is a rising up out of that place, that we're not meant to live in depression, right? And darkness and all of those things, or fear or discouragement. We're not meant to live that way forever, right? We're meant to actually climb mountains. So again, we need to be encouraged. And I think of I don't know if you guys, maybe some of you younger guys might be less familiar with this, and if so, you got to go watch this. But classic film, 1965, Best Picture. Anybody know what it is? It's The Sound of Music. The Sound of Music, Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews. Great film if you ever get a chance to check it out, or maybe you guys have seen it many times. But there's a part in this movie where the character of Maria is afraid, right? She is being challenged to rise and go and climb a new peak that she's not familiar with, she's never been before. So what does she do? She runs away. She goes back to Egypt, right? She goes back to what's safe and what's comfortable. For her, it's this convent where she'd been living to learn how to become a nun, and so she's hiding in the convent. Well, her mentor comes along, and she kind of finds her there, and she gets her into her office, and she says, now, Maria, she says, we love you, but I really believe from God that you are called to something more, that you're actually not meant for this, that there's something that God is calling to you and that you're kind of hiding from. And she sings this song, and you can all thank God this morning that I will not grace you with a performance in those operatic altitudes of that, but just the lyrics of the song are this: climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow every rainbow till you find your dream, a dream that will take all the love you can give every day of your life for as long as you live. So climb every mountain. And this is the encouragement that the mother abbess, the mentor, gives to her student. And that's the kind of encouragement that I think God wants to give us as well. And the way that God puts it in the Psalms, in Psalm 121, which we just sang about here, was it says, I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? Where? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. You can read the rest of it on your own, but down at the end it says he will keep you from harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and your going, both now and forevermore. Amen? Is that encouraging? Right? That we can lift up our eyes to the mountains, that we don't have to be afraid to go into the valley because we know that God is there. We can lift up our eyes to the mountains because God will help us to get there, that we can rise, that we can climb because the Lord is with us wherever we go. Is that good news? Is that encouraging to us? Right? We need to get that deep down inside of us. And so if you find yourself maybe in a valley for whatever reason, these are some things to keep in mind. Now, let's move to the next one. Let's say that you have come up out of the valley. You've begun to rise. You've begun the climb, right? And so you're climbing a little bit. And so as you're climbing, you are starting to realize that things are getting a little bit better, right? Things are getting a little bit better. Things are doing well, and things are going good, and you're ascending, right? You're ascending upward. And as you climb, there's things that are going to come against you that you have to overcome, but you overcome them, and things, maybe start to get better. That job situation is improving, or maybe you get there to that place where, there's a relationship that's growing, or whatever it might be, right? Fill in the blanks. But there's another thing that we need to watch out for here, and that is, so the first was discouragement. The second is distraction. So imagine this. So let's say you're climbing a mountain, let's say, and you come to a point where things start to look pretty good, right? You're getting to that place where it's a pretty beautiful spot. You find this spot. So take Mount Beacon, for example. If you climb Mount Beacon, you get about halfway up Mount Beacon, and there's a really sweet spot. It's where there's that casino ruin that's there, and you can go out, and it's a beautiful view. It's a beautiful spot. And if you're looking for a short hike, that's a great place to stop. But here's the thing. That's not the top of Mount Beacon. You might think it is. You might wish that it was, but it's not. It's actually halfway or a little bit more, something like that. And there can be a temptation for us to get distracted by places that are pretty good, but they're not actually the goal. They're not actually the top. We can stop there. Now, sometimes it might be proper to stop there. It might be fine to stop there. But other times, there's going to be the realization that this is not the goal, that we have a goal, we have a purpose. The Greek there is telos, right? There is a goal. There is something that we're supposed to be attaining to. And this is not just in our spiritual journey, but this is in every aspect of life, that we must not forget that there is a higher place. Because if you only ever stop at that one spot, right, you never get to experience the top. You never get to see what it's like up at the peak. And so we need to resist the temptation to stop at the place that's not actually the goal that God has for us. You understand that? You with me? All right. So here we got our illustration here, okay? And we're going to do a little illustration here this morning. And we're going to think about it this way. So think of an object lesson, right? So what kind of objects do you have in your pockets? You maybe have your keys or your wallet or your phone. You got all these various things. Well, I happen to have an onion here this morning, okay? So I always keep an onion with me because you never know when you may need an onion. It's very handy. You could play a little ball with it, or I guess there's some other things you could do with it as well, but this is an onion, and so I have this onion here, and so the illustration here is that you can take anything, any aspect of life, and that this principle holds true, and I'm going to prove it to you. So let's say you have an onion, okay? Now, you could, with this onion, you could take the onion and you could just enjoy this onion the way that it is, right? So you could just kind of take a little bite out of an onion, right? And, so we hear some cries of distress. I mean, it's not bad, right? I mean, it's an onion, right? So, you're eating the onion, and it's like, it's okay. I mean, it's an onion, right? So it's like it's all right. But we laugh a little bit because we say, well, that's not actually really what an onion is for, really, necessarily, right? And so I could just stand here and just eat this entire onion, and that would be the end of the illustration. But I'm not going to do that, right? We could instead say, well, you know what? Actually, that's not really what an onion is for. That's not the purpose of an onion. That's not the goal. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to ascend, right? So I'm going to ascend. So what do? I take the onion, and I say, well, let me cut off the bit that I bit, and then I'm going to cut a little bit of onion here this morning. I'm going to cut up this onion, maybe kind of dice it up small. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to cut it up. So I'm cutting up this onion now, and I'm going to add this onion to a little something I've got here. I think I can lower this now. I think I can turn this off. I think that's hot enough. Matt's like, oh, thank God. Thank God. That's hot enough. And so we've got this onion here. Now, I wanted to actually saute this onion, but we're going to have to just make do with what I have because I forgot my pan. But nonetheless, so I've got this onion here. I cut it up a little bit. So then what do? I take the onion, and I put it into this little bowl, or not bowl, that's a pot. And I put this into this pot here, and so what I'm doing now is I'm taking the onion, and I am placing it in here. Now, that, you might say, that's more of what the purpose of an onion is, right? We know that an onion kind of adds flavor to something, right? And you could say that that's actually better than just eating a raw onion. Would you agree on that? Probably, like you could eat a raw onion, but it's probably better to take the onion and add it to something else to improve that. And so I've got a little pot of soup here. Now, think about this for the purpose of our illustration. What actually am I doing? I'm taking something that's good, and I am sacrificing that. You follow? So there's fire here, right? I take this thing, I sacrifice it on the fire. I can't go back, right? Once the onion has been cut up and put into the soup, I can't go back and get the raw onion out of the soup again, right? Like, that's not possible. I have given up what I had, which was good. I have sacrificed it unto that which is better. Does that make sense? I have ascended, okay? So I have stepped up one level. Now, I can, if I want, I could. I've got my little soup ladle here, and I've got my bowl of soup. So I could just take this bowl of soup here, and I could just sit here right in front of you. Ooh, nice and warm, not too hot. It's good, though. I could sit here with this little bowl of soup, and I could just eat this in front of everybody, right? I could just sit up here and eat that. And that'd be, like, good for me, but it'd be kind of boring for the rest of you, right? Like, that's not really all that interesting. And so I could do that. Or I could choose to ascend a little bit higher. Now, what would be better than maybe just sitting here and maybe eating this soup by itself here? Well, it would be if I had some friends, right? And so here I have a room full of friends. And so can I invite two friends to come up with me here? Who would like to come up this morning? Yeah, let's have somebody, because you have to be able to actually get up on the stage here a little bit. So, but yeah, okay, come on, Lisa. Yeah, and somebody maybe from over here, somebody from this side, come on over here. Let's have Sarah. Sarah, why don't you come on up? So Sarah, why don't you come on up here, and we'll have Lisa is going to sit over here. And so my friends Sarah and Lisa are going to come up here this morning and just hang out with us, and I'm going to get them a little bit of soup here from the bowl. And so you can think about this in terms of your own life, right? Nothing wrong with eating alone. Nothing wrong with having some soup by yourself. I think it's actually pretty decent. And so you could have I've got some vegetables. We've got a little chicken. It's chicken soup, and you can feel free. There you go. There's a bowl, and there's that. And so my friends here are here, and you can go ahead and have a little bit if you'd like to try it. And so thank you, God, for this soup. And so as my friends here are sitting and eating this soup, right, this is better, right? Like this is better. Like I could. It's okay-ish. It's okay. Yeah, exactly right. It's a little plain. We could use a little more onion, maybe, right? So yeah. So second service, it's going to get even better, right? So we're going to have some onion in there, and maybe I can actually saute. But nonetheless, and so these guys are eating this. So this is better, right? Why? Because we're sharing it with someone else, okay? And it doesn't mean that you couldn't stop at just eating by yourself, but it's better when we share it together. Now, we could just all sit here and eat the soup in front of you guys, right? We've ascended to that point. But that's not actually the best. What would be even better? Well, what would be better is if we had a little conversation with one another, right? And so I might say, Lisa, how are you this morning? Are you doing well? Good. And Sarah, how are you today? You're doing fine. Your playing was beautiful this morning. And so I just want to thank you guys for being and being good sports and coming up here. So we start to have a little conversation. And so this is good, right? So we've ascended yet again, right? So as we ascend, we go up and up and up and up. Now, I want to think about this for just a second here. Now, it's possible for us to stop at any point. Do you understand that? You could stop at, like, I'm having a bowl of soup by myself. Or I could stop at, here I have my friends. Or I could stop at conversation. I can stop at any point. And that's fine. But it's possible for us to get into the habit, listen to this, to get into the habit of stopping at one particular point. Do you understand that? Like, it's possible, like, for example, if I'm somebody who has a hard time maybe with socialization and things like that, maybe I'm eating alone all the time, right? And I get stuck at that place. Maybe, let me use a funny illustration. So, like, perhaps this. Maybe I'm somebody with the gift of gab, right? So, like, I'm that kind of guy where I have you guys over for soup, and then I'm just talk. So we've ascended to the place of conversation, and I'm just talking the whole time. And maybe, you know, like, it's okay every once in a while, but, like, maybe I do that every single time. And so maybe, they start to get a little bit annoyed. They're like, okay, all right, here he goes again, just talk. And we think about that, and it's kind of funny, because we've all, maybe had that friend or been that friend at various points of our lives. But what's really happening there is, what's happened is I've ascended to this place of conversation, but I now have failed to realize that there's something beyond, or I've forgotten that there's something beyond, or I've gotten into the habit of getting off at that place of conversation and forgetting that there is a sacrifice that needs to happen in order for me to rise above that. Are you guys with me on this? So what needs to be sacrificed? I have to be willing to stop my talking and say, you know what? I'm going to pause my conversation because I just want to talk about everything I want to talk about, and I'm going to stop for a second, and I'm going to say, well, wait a second. How are you today? Like, what's going on with you? Like, no, like, seriously, like, what's going on in your life? Like, how's your back? Like, I heard about what happened with your back. And I start to ask these kind of probing questions. And really, I would then be quiet and listen as Sarah tells me about things. Now, for the sake of time, we're not going to go through that whole thing, but you understand, right? I am sacrificing what I want to say for the sake of something higher. What is that something higher? It's relationship, right? So conversation is not the top. Relationship is above. And so when I realize that and I see, oh, there's something above, I can sacrifice what I want because I know that there's a higher place. I know that there's a goal. Thank you, guys. If you guys want to go back to your seats, thank you so much for hanging with us this morning. Can we give a hand for these guys? Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I'm so sorry we couldn't have you stay longer, but it wasn't too bad. All right, there you go. Excellent. Okay, I'm no Julia Childs, but butter makes it better. That's what she always says. All right, but I won't do any more of that. So you understand that a little bit, right? So we can get to this kind of place and we can get stuck. And so what we need to do is we need to remember that there's something higher, that there's something above that we can continue to raise and continue to go up to. And so we don't want to get in the habit of stopping there. Let me give you this illustration from Scripture. In Matthew chapter 4, it says this, the devil took him, that's Jesus, to a what? A very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. What is it saying there? It took him to a very high place. Now, notice something here. Every time that you ascend, from the onion to the soup to the conversation to the relationship, the temptation to stop there gets stronger. Do you notice that? Like, it's not very tempting for me to just eat this entire raw onion, right? Like, it's like, probably not going to do that. It's pretty obvious it's better if I ascend. But when you get to things like relationship or conversation or whatever, it's like it gets harder and harder to resist the temptation to make the sacrifice because the thing that you're sacrificing is actually really good. Do you understand that? The thing that's being sacrificed is good. And so the devil shows Jesus the goodest thing, right? Like, he's like, the most awesome thing. He calls it all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. What does that mean? It's something that's so great that like it's very, very hard to resist. The devil's like, I'm going to give you the best thing in the world. I'm going to give you all the things that you've wanted most in your life. And you think about that. And Jesus has to resist that temptation. It's the ultimate temptation. And he's able to resist it. Why? He said to him, "Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall" what? "Worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." Jesus says, I know that there's something higher than that. You think that this is the highest peak that's possible. I know there's something even above and beyond that. And so I'm willing to make the sacrifice because I know I haven't forgotten. I haven't been willing to give into that temptation of distraction. I'm going to go to the high place. I'm going to continue on up the mountain. Do you understand that? You guys with me? Okay, and so this is what the illustration for us as well. And so if we want to continue to scale the peaks of life, we need to remember that there is more that God has for you. There is something above even whatever those things are that tempt us to get off the path. Okay, now let's talk about, this is going to be our last thing this morning, and I want to talk with you guys for a few minutes about what are those high things? What are those peaks? What are those things? So let's say that you've climbed and you've overcome, you've kind of risen up out of discouragement, and then you've overcome distraction, and then you've climbed up to the top of the peak, and you're up there on top of Mount Osceola, and it's really, really beautiful. And there's certain things in life that cause us to have this kind of response, right? We come to the high places. So, like, what are the high places of life? These are things like let's say we had relationship, right? Like, if you ascend, maybe that ascends to friendship, right? Like, friendship. Is that a good thing in life? Is it good to have friends? Yes, anyone? Is it good? How about love? Is love a good thing in life? That's really good. How about marriage? Is that a good thing? Right? The family. These are good. Right. So what are these? These are peaks. These are mountains. These are like high places in life that we want to ascend to. There's other kinds as well, not just relational. You can think about like your career, right? Like arising to a place where you're doing the thing that you love and you're doing it well, and you've come to a place of satisfaction in that. Like that might be called glory, right? Glory. It's a good thing, right? It's a beautiful thing. Or you could think about like money. Sometimes we think about money negatively, but think about it positively, like having the ability and the security to care for the ones that you love and provide for your family and to do it in a way that doesn't like kill your soul. Like that's actually really awesome, isn't it? Like that's a high place. I would call that power. Right? Like power, so we have these mountains, we have these different peaks that we're all climbing to in life, whether we realize it or not, and we're sacrificing the things along the way that are going to hold us back so that we can continue to climb to these peaks. And so when you've attained this, when you've gotten to the top, what is it that we do? Well, think about this. So when you get to the top of a mountain, we have this instinct, we have this tendency to do something, and that is this. Right? Like imagine, like we're at the top, and I'm looking out. I just take a second, you can take it all in. Wow. You maybe say, wow, like this is awesome. Picture yourself up on top of the mountain. Maybe you say to your friend, you're like, man, I'm so glad that we did this. I'm glad that we pushed through. We made it to the top. Man, this is beautiful. This is awesome. And what is it that we're doing in that moment? We're appreciating it. We're taking a moment to show respect for what we've accomplished. There's this thing that's like, man, it's beautiful. I need to take a moment. I need to give of my time. I need to give my attention to this thing. I need to drink this thing in. Well, there's actually a biblical word for that. Do you know what that biblical word is? The biblical word for that we use, that we may not think of it in this way, is worship. That's worship, right? When you give your attention to something, you give your appreciation, you give it, you praise it. You say, man, this is an awesome place. This is a beautiful thing. I'm praising it. I'm inviting everybody. I want everybody else to know about this cool thing that we did because it's awesome. So I'm going to post it on Instagram or whatever it is. Like I give this thing my attention. That is worship. And here's the thing. There are appropriate places of worship. And I believe that those appropriate places of worship are the high places of life. They are the mountaintops. You think about before the temple was built, I don't have time to go through all this, but in Samuel and Kings, it said that they would go up to the high place and worship on the high place. And then when the temple was built by Solomon, he went and built it where? On a high place. They would go up to these high places in order to worship. And so worship is the appropriate response when you ascend to a peak, when you ascend to the top of a mountain. Are you guys with me on that? Are you cool with that? Okay. Now, here's the trap. Here's the danger that we need to avoid, and this is what we got to watch out for. I'm going to call it displacement, and it's very, very subtle. And so you get to the top of a mountain, and you want to worship, but there's a question. What is the appropriate manner of worship to engage in on top of the mountain? Because there's two ways you can do it. Check this out. So you can worship in such a way as to essentially glorify that place itself, right? Like that idea. So like let's say it's love, right? Let's say we've climbed this mountain and it's love. And so maybe in my mind I have a picture of what love is, because love is an abstract thing, right? Like we can't like love, you can't put your hand on it. It's like it's this abstract thing. So what do? I create a picture in your mind, or maybe marriage, right? Like you have an image in your mind of like what a great marriage looks like, or what love looks like to you, or what like a great job situation would be. Or we do it with sexuality too, right? We might say like, okay, that's what that kind of like, gratification would be like, whatever. We create in our minds an image of the thing, right? But it's not the thing itself, or it's not the idea. It is an image of it that allows us to be able to give our appreciation, but what we're actually appreciating is sort of like the essence of the idea. Are you guys tracking with me? It's the essence of the idea. It's actually what the idea is. You could say it is the spirit of the idea, right? So what do? I climb to this high place. I create for myself an image of the spirit of this thing that I am worshiping. You tracking with me on this? I climb up to the high place and I make an image for myself so that I can give my praise and my appreciation to the spirit of this idea. What does that sound like? Well, it says in the days of Solomon, it says in the last days of Solomon, he built a high place for Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Moloch, the god of the Ammonites. And he did the same for all his foreign wives and burned incense and sacrifices to their what? To their gods. What is a god? A god is a spirit of something excellent. A god is the essence of something that is awesome, that is an appropriate place of worship. In the ancient world, they called them daimons, D-A-E-M-O-N, from which we get our English word what? Demon, right? Like a demon didn't used to be an evil spirit. It was the god of a high place. It was the spirit of something awesome that was something beautiful, and you would sacrifice unto that thing. And friends, nothing has changed today. We still do the same thing today, whether it's money or power or love or fame or sex or whatever it is. We worship on these high places because that is the nature of what we do. And here's the thing is that when you get in the habit of worshiping on a high place, what you're ultimately saying is this: that is the thing for me which is ultimate. That is the highest of high places. That's as far as I go. And the thing about that's a little bit scary. So check this out. So like, let's say you climb a mountain. Let's just pick one, right? Let's say like family, okay? So family to you is awesome. Like it's awesome, it's ultimate, and you've got an image in your mind of what your perfect family is, and you have given your praise and your attention to that, and you are willing to sacrifice all other things unto that place. Does that make sense? What does that actually look like? Well, that actually looks like, I think I have a picture. Can you go to maybe to that picture there? But has anyone ever seen this movie? It's okay, I know you're Christians, but you can say, okay, yeah, I've seen this movie, and this is The Godfather, right? And we all laugh, right? And we say, like, oh my gosh. Because why? Because this is a story about something that in a certain culture, so let's use the Italian culture, for example, where it's like every culture on the face of the earth has something that has a high place that typically is the high place that is preeminent in that culture. So if you're Italian, maybe it's family. If you're Japanese, maybe it's honor. Maybe in other places, it's various things. It could be money, it could be sex, it could be whatever it is. But there are these things. And so this is an example, and we laugh at it because it's become so famous or maybe so infamous that we have a whole subgenre of movies that are devoted to this. But it is the tendency to idolize family above all other things. And if you idolize family above all other things, this is what you get. This is what happens. I will sacrifice anything. I will sacrifice anyone. I will do whatever it takes to protect my family. I will do whatever it takes to make sure that my family prospers, that my family succeeds. I will put down all other things. Now, that's scary, right? Like, that's actually scary. And that is actually what happens, that when we make something ultimate, it becomes a god. It becomes a master. It becomes something dark. It becomes something scary and something ultimately destructive. And that is what happens on these high places. Are you still with me on this? Okay, so what do? What's the escape? What is the actual way? Because we said we tend to worship on these high places. Well, what is the answer to this riddle, to this conundrum? The answer is the genius of monotheism, right? And what is monotheism? The Judeo-Christian faith. The idea that so what is that idea? The idea is that of all of the gods, of all of the peaks, there is one other peak that is actually highest. There is one mountain that goes higher than any other mountain at all. Like, these are all great mountains, and we all might have our favorites and or places to hang out. But there's one mountain that you can go to that is higher than all other mountains. There is one high place that is higher than all other high places. In Isaiah chapter 2, it says, "In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above all the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many people will say, 'Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, the temple of the God of Jacob.'" Because when you create a high place and you say, "This is the highest of all high places," what you're saying there is there's a spirit that indwells that high place. There's an essence of that which is higher above all other things. And what would you call that? What would you call the spirit that is the embodiment of that which is highest above all things? You might call it like the God of gods. You might call it the Lord of lords. You might call it the King of kings. We might just call it, by shorthand, God. Like, that's what God is. God is the spirit which indwells the place that is higher above all other things. And so when we worship God, when we say that we set God above all other things, it's the proposition that there is only one spirit who is worthy of ultimate worship, that is above all other things. That's what we mean when we sing the song, "You are worthy of it all," right? You are worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. That's what we're saying. We set you above all other things. And so what we wanted to do in our lives is we are called to climb mountains. And when we get to the top of those peaks, check this out. What we want to do and what we're called to do as people of faith, as people of God, so as to escape the darkness and to escape the slavery and to escape the trap of the enemy, is we want to worship on that mountain in a way that exalts God with whatever that thing is, so that when I worship at the mountain of love or the mountain of friendship or the mountain of wealth or the mountain of power or whatever it is, I am always remembering that there is one from which all these things come, and I am giving him glory, and I am thinking, how do I take this thing, this place, this goodness, where I find myself, and use it to give glory to God, not to raise it above him, but instead, and make it an idol, but instead to worship God with this thing. And some of these things we can think of as negative things or whatever, because they often get misused. But these are not bad things. These are good things. So the question is, how do we worship God with that thing, with that idea, at that high place? And so we're going to think about that over the next couple of weeks. We're going to kind of take some of these different mountains. We're going to talk about how do we worship God through family. How do we worship? How do we glorify him? How do we climb that peak? How do we avoid the ravines and the traps and the pitfalls along the way in a way that enables us to climb to the highest place and there to worship in a way that doesn't make us slaves, but a way that sets us free?